Alright guys, so let's talk about the Middle East and let's talk about China because both of these are interconnected. So the US has reached a point of desperation. We are witnessing a loss of hegemony in real time, and let's talk about it. In the Middle East, the US has lost control. Biden told Israel that weapons would pause, but Bibi shot back. He told the US that Israel would fight alone and the assault won't end. In the Indo-Pacific, we are seeing China get stronger across the board. Their exports are flying up, their industries are growing, and domestic demand is recovering. Consumer prices in China are recovering, they're going up. The local Chinese are starting to spend again, and that's helping the economy. Wasn't China supposed to collapse? It's the end of Beijing tomorrow, right? But what's clear as day is the collapse of US influence around the world. And let's talk about the diplomatic plus economic disasters. To escape the absolute pain, the absolute disaster in the Israel war, Biden is trying to rope in Saudi Arabia to save the day. Biden and the Saudis are working on a mega deal to normalize relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. It's essentially an off ramp for the US to wash their hands clean of the region. And for the Saudis, the US is tempting them with security, economic, and technology guarantees. So if the Saudis work with the Americans to bring peace, they will get a lot of benefits. They can access advanced US weapons, AI chips, and nuclear power. But it's a very long shot because everything is tied to Israel ending the war. Sullivan himself has mentioned two key criteria which would never happen. The first is getting Israel to end the war in Gaza. Well, that isn't going to happen anytime soon. The second is getting Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. But is that even possible? MBS wants the creation of a separate Palestinian state, in other words, a two-state solution. But what are the chances here? The hardliners in Israel, they simply won't accept it. And I can't see Bibi selling the idea to his government either. And this is going to leave the US out in the cold. The deal is falling apart as we speak. Blinken has traveled all the way to Saudi Arabia, dangling quite a few carrots. But MBS is moving to change the terms of the deal. They want to exclude Israel away from the deal. And this is quite a smart move. As you'll see, the Saudis are trying to extract the maximum amount of benefits from the US without giving up anything. They are betting on Biden's desperation to get a win before the elections to seal the deal. And if we look into the details, it's really hilarious. It's the ultimate diplomatic heist to get the US to overcommit for nothing much in return. So what does MBS want? Simply put, he wants the ultimate security guarantee from the US. The Middle East is a very unstable region. As we have seen over the past 6 months, anything and everything can happen there. Riyadh wants an upgraded version of what Bahrain got from the US. Last year, the kingdom entered into a security and prosperity agreement with the Americans, and this allowed them to access US technology in defense, science, and trade. They are essentially a major non-NATO ally, but the Saudis wants more than that. MBS probably wants a formal security arrangement with the US, something that is written into law that future US presidents just can't cancel. A guarantee that if Saudi Arabia gets into trouble, the US military will bail them out. By pushing Israel away from the terms and conditions, Saudi Arabia will get the best of both worlds. They won't anger Iran, plus they get the US military at their beck and call. And to make this happen, the Saudis are dangling the ultimate carrot to the US, something that's even more concerning than Israel to Biden, and that is the specter of China. 6 months back, Beijing and Riyadh signed a $7 billion swap line deal to trade in local currencies. It's not just for bilateral trade. This is essentially a warning to Washington that China is wresting control from the Americans. And if Saudi Arabia starts pricing oil in the Chinese yuan, this would cripple the petrodollar. Just recently, the Saudis announced something shocking as well. The kingdom's 100 billion AI fund dropped a bombshell that they would divest away from China if the US asked them to do so. If the US wants decoupling, they would decouple. The Saudi investment fund has declared the US as their top partner. They're going to work with two US companies as well to develop AI capabilities. And on the surface, it looks like the Saudis are bowing to the Americans and China lost a big investor, but that isn't really the case. China's chip making is still a few years away, probably 5 years at max. The Saudis getting chips from Beijing today won't help them win in the AI race. It's better to get chips from US for now. Lean on Americans for their technology while China develops their own. China doesn't need Saudi money to develop their own chips. Companies like Huawei already have enormous funding to bridge the gap. And here's the truth, the big pillars of Saudi China trade are virtually unaffected. The Saudis still depend on China for their economy. Beijing is the biggest importer of crude oil in the world, and Saudi Arabia is the second biggest supplier to China. They might have lost to Russia, but they sold nearly 86 million tons to the Chinese. That trade obviously isn't going to change, which means relations between China and Saudi Arabia aren't affected. In fact, it's actually going to grow. Saudi Aramco, the kingdom's oil company, is moving to acquire a 10% stake in a Chinese company. It's part of their plan to grow their presence in China itself. You don't do this if you're trying to decouple. Saudi Arabia is actually expanding relations with China where it matters. If Saudi Arabia gets the US deal without Israel normalization, this will be the win of the century, a big win for MBS. They get essentially a mountain of security guarantees and access to US tech, while America gets essentially nothing in return. But this gets worse in Asia. China is starting to freak out the US in a vital industry that changes everything. Beijing just got a big win in shipbuilding, and this tells us how far Chinese industries have really come. The energy giant Qatar just placed an order for Chinese ships. It's a $6 billion order to build 18 LNG gas carriers to expand their energy fleet. The vessels, of course, will be built by China State Shipbuilding, a state owned company. It's not just a commercial builder, the company builds Chinese military vessels as well. But let's focus on the LNG situation first. This order will be the world's biggest delivery of LNG ships. It's taking away markets that were dominated by the South Koreans. Hyundai, Hanwha, and Samsung are all feeling the heat of China's shipbuilders. China's capabilities are starting to dwarf the biggest shipbuilders in the world, and there's nothing that can stop it. The ships will be over 340 meters long, 53 meters wide, and 27 meters deep. Just imagine a vessel that's 3 football fields long and half the height of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. That's a gigantic vessel built to deliver LNG at scale. Qatar ordered the ships from China because they need giant vessels to move bigger volumes around the world. They have to deliver at scale, and China can get the job done at a cheaper price. Qatar's economy is driven by energy exports, including LNG. By 2028, their GDP will hit $300 billion, of which at least 40% will come from fossil fuel exports. To accomplish that, they need to move an insane amount of volumes halfway across the world. And the only country left with the ability to deliver the ships once again is China. This is what happens when you outsource your manufacturing to other countries. When the West did that decades ago, it kind of allowed China to leapfrog ahead of the competition. We are now in an era where China builds essentially everything. Whether it's EVs, solar panels, or even ships, the world needs Beijing. As the global economy expands, only China has the industries to build the physical infrastructure. Global trade is being powered by the Chinese. It's really shocking if we look at the overall numbers. In 2023 last year, China's share of global shipping output was 47%. That's more than the next two shipbuilders combined, South Korea and Japan. This is what market domination looks like. This chart says it all. There will always be a need for ships in global trade. Goods needs to be shipped all over the world, and nearly 1 in 2 ships are going to be made in China. In contrast, the US has less than 0.2% of the global market today. Shipbuilding is virtually non-existent in America, and is a very big reason why Biden is afraid. And let's understand how important this really is. To maintain hegemony, the US needs to control all parts of global trade. One good example is imposing tariffs on imports. Biden is about to hit China with a 100% tariff on their EV cars sold in the US, and this is weaponizing the consumer market. That is one lever the US can definitely control, but because China is the world's biggest shipbuilder, trying to block the transportation of goods is virtually impossible. The whole world relies on Chinese ships to move goods around. Taiwan, for example, is still buying Chinese ships. Their largest shipping company, Evergreen, just ordered 6 box ships from a Chinese shipyard. China controls a vital point in global supply chains. The US can push for decoupling for sure, de-risking, reshoring, and of course, friendshoring, right? But it's simply not enough, it's not feasible. While Biden can make his chips in Taiwan, South Korea, or even back in the US, you still need a Chinese vessel to ship it to the end users. And this is where things get wild. The Chinese government also subsidizes the construction of ships. According to estimates, up to 20% of a typical cargo vessel is indirectly subsidized by government money, and this includes grants, rebates, and cash payments. That allows China to lower the final cost of a ship to customers. They can compete on quality and beat everyone else on price. China can do it better for cheaper. Here's how serious the gap is in commercial shipbuilding. China accounts for half of all merchant cargo ships in 2022, and is probably more today. One in two ships delivered will come from a Chinese shipyard. And this means the US can't block Chinese trade from the world. Even if their allies like Japan or South Korea refuse to build ships for China, it won't matter. The Chinese shipyards have more than enough capacity to build a Chinese merchant fleet in no time. They can build their own ships and bypass any US sanctions. When it comes to trade, containing China is simply impossible. And if you think that's bad enough, wait till you see this next chart. China isn't just the world's largest shipbuilder, they are the biggest ship owner in the world. Greece used to own the biggest fleet in the world at around 249 million tons. They dominated the market for a very long time. But things have changed. China has surpassed them. And looking at the trajectory, China could double the Greek fleet in the next 10 or even 20 years. The consequences will be profound. Countries that need to move cargo will need the help of China. If the US decides to sanction countries dealing with Chinese vessels, global trade will grind to a halt instantly. This will be even worse than the Suez Canal crisis. Goods will get undelivered, companies will go under, and inflation will hit double digits rather easily. And these aren't fairy tales we're peddling here, just the cold, hard truth. As it stands, China controls 16% of the world's market share. Trying to block that will be unthinkable to global trade. The US can try to get countries to block Chinese vessels from entering their ports, but it would destroy supply chains. Shipbuilding is another Chinese overcapacity that's making the US lose sleep at night. And on the military front is an even bigger disaster. In a report by the US Naval Intelligence, China has 230 times the shipbuilding capacity of the US. That's an overwhelming advantage that seems impossible at first, but it actually isn't. The reason is very simple. Chinese shipyards can build both commercial and military ships. They can just as easily churn out an LNG tanker, a container ship, or a warship. And as we have seen in the Ukraine conflict, money isn't enough to win a war. You need the capabilities to produce the actual weapons itself. You need the power of industries to build all the armaments to win. Borrowing money to spend isn't a solution. China already has the world's biggest navy. They have more ships versus the US today, 350 versus 290, and that's just the current number. If we get into a hot war, China can assemble an armada much faster than the US and their allies put together. No amount of money printing or selling US bonds can bridge the gap. You can either build the physical products or you can't. China is winning the US when it comes to building up the hardware, the real physical stuff. And this is the reality the US is facing. Things in the Middle East are breaking down, and the industrial might has been shifted to China. The multipolar world is already here. It's not coming, it's already here. And it's just a question if the US wants to accept it or fight back against reality. But let me know what you think. Will Saudi Arabia get their deal with the US? And will Biden sanction China's shipbuilding next? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.